Private members' business item number 2653, standing in the name of the Honourable Penny Sharp in relation to the Honourable Anne Symonds AM.
Mr. President.
The Honourable Penny Sharp.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move item number 2653, standing in my name. Mr. President, I rise today to move this motion to recognise the life and contribution of Elizabeth Anne Symonds to the people of New South Wales and to send the Legislative Council's condolences to Anne's family. Anne Symonds was a member of the New South Wales Legislative Council for 16 years, from the 8th of September 1982 to the 30th of April 1998. Anne was a woman of great passion, great courage and great humour. Anne was also my friend, my mentor and someone for whom the Labor family mourns greatly. And I know from the reactions of the staff in this building, the community groups, the former public servants and her former colleagues from all sides of the parliament that she will be deeply missed by all who worked with her over the 16 years she was here and the 20 years since she left this place. Anne was born on the 12th of July 1939 in Murwillumbah. She trained as a teacher at Armidale's Teachers College and the University of New South Wales. An activist all her life, Anne joined the Labor Party in 1967 and she became an alderman, as they were called then, in 1974, before becoming the first woman to be the Deputy Mayor at Waverley Council. Anne was Deputy Chair and then Chair of the Social Issues Committee from 1988 to 1998, responsible for over 10 parliamentary inquiries during that time. Anne became the Chair of the Social Issues Committee in 1995 as part of the incoming Carr government. In this role, Anne conducted inquiries into youth violence, children's advocacy, sexual violence, children of imprisoned parents, guardianship, aged care and nursing homes and hepatitis C. These were groundbreaking inquiries that shaped social policy for the decades that have followed. In the early days of the current parliamentary committee system, Anne, Max Willis and other members of the committee led the way on pursuing a bipartisan approach as the most effective way to see meaningful policy development and legislative change. This culture of genuine collaboration and unanimous reports and recommendations continues to this day. As the staff who worked in the Secretariat knew, Anne took the role of chair very seriously and asked a lot of the members and the secretariats. Anne's commitment to the Social Issues Committee resulted in the formation of close relationships with members and staff, many friendships continuing on well after she left this place. I want to acknowledge Julie Langsworth, who became a great friend of Anne's, and thank her for the input to this motion today. Anne was most particularly concerned about the plight of children and young people. She was one of our greatest ever advocates for young people. In her foreword to the Children's Advocacy Report, Anne described it this way: "Advocacy for children is about systems and individuals recognising the rights and needs of all children and young people and responding to those rights and needs. It also involves allowing children and young people to have a say in the decisions that are likely to affect them." Anne's work on the rights and needs of vulnerable children and families included the inquiry into children of imprisoned parents. Anne was passionate about reforms to the criminal justice system and, in fact, she nominated corrective services as the one ministry she would have liked to have headed up. This is one area where Anne was deeply involved before, during and after her time in Parliament. She never stopped advocating for the rights and needs of children of incarcerated parents and their family members. Anne was involved in many other issues: gun law reform, support for the arts community, advocacy for services for Indigenous people, the anti-nuclear movement, the rights of sex workers and equal rights for LGBTI people. The reality also was that Anne's strong advocacy on many of these issues meant she would never become a minister in a Labor government. Anne did not, however, let this deter her work for change, and Labor missed an opportunity for a reformist minister to make her mark. Anne was a co-founder of the Australian Parliamentary Group for Drug Law Reform, where in 1990, with Michael Moore, an independent MP from the ACT Assembly, a group of over 100 members from across the state and federal parliaments formed, a group that she literally signed me up to on the first day I was in the parliament. Anne had considerable impact on drug law reform during her time in Parliament. She moved New South Wales towards a more compassionate, evidence-based drug policy. She was chair of the 1993 Joint Select Committee of the inquiry into the trial or establishment of a safe injecting room. Despite the evidence detailed in the report that safe injecting rooms can and do save lives, Anne was disappointed not to have succeeded in getting support for such a facility via this inquiry. The political will was just not there at the time. Anne and others, including Dr Alex Wodak and Tony Trimingham, continued to advocate for the establishment of a safe injecting room. This included their act of civil disobedience in establishing their own first injecting room, called the Tolerance Room, at the Wayside Chapel in King's Cross. At the time, 1,116 young Australians had lost their lives to drug overdoses in that 1 year. The time is finally right after lengthy debate during the 1999 New South Wales Drug Summit here at Parliament House, held actually in this chamber. And the Carr government, with John Della Bosca as Minister, established the Medically Supervised Injecting Centre. Anne made this observation about the importance of committee reports on the back of this experience, and I quote, "I always say to people, you have to do the best reports. Do not limit yourself to what you put in. You have to put forward what you really want, because you never know when someone will want to pick it up and do something with it." And that was what eventually happened when an injecting room was set up. Anne, as a parliamentarian, was a sight to behold, smart, irreverent and passionate about everything she did. She was not beyond going after those from her own side when they displeased her. But a mark of Anne's approach to her time in here was her capacity to get on with people from all parties. Political persuasions didn't really matter too much to Anne. She made friends equally with Ian Cohen and John Tingle. Besides sharing the joys of a dry martini, John and Anne were the most definitely at the opposite ends of the debate on gun law reform. Nevertheless, there was a genuine mutual respect and good humour between them. At the retirement of Anne, John Tingle noted in his speech in this House that the important lesson Anne taught him was animosity reflected in the chamber should never be carried outside it. Anne also had a particular soft spot for several National Party members, Adrian Symonds and Doug Moppet. Anne and Doug were to grow particularly close, mostly due to their work together on the Social Issues Committee. Anne referred to Doug during the debate on one of the Social Issues Committee reports as the only intellectual in the National Party. The feeling was mutual between Doug and Anne, and as shown by his tribute to Anne upon her retirement, where he said, "Well done, Anne, thou good and faithful servant. The respite from your labours that you seek is well deserved and has been thoroughly earned. You go from this place gowned in our friendship, adorned by our unqualified admiration and crowned by our ineffable love." Some of Anne's strongest connections were with women members, and one of her closest colleagues was Meredith Bergman. As the Honourable Reverend Fred Knoll will probably remember, Anne was an unceasing, witty and sometimes fierce interjector when it came to sitting on these benches. Anne and Meredith were often referred to as Marge Simpson's cranky sisters, Patty and Selma. Anne also forged great relationships with Virginia Chadwick, Jenny Gardner, Helen Shamho and Beryl Evans. Mr President, I stand here today as someone for whom the life and legacy of Anne Symonds looms large. I came to this place after the departure of Carmel Tebbit to the other place, and it was, of course, Carmel Tebbit who replaced Anne Symonds when she retired from this place in 1998. I have always felt that I have a responsibility to be a voice for the issues that Anne cared about in this place, not because they were Anne's, but because the issues go to the heart of how we care about the most vulnerable and often the most marginalised people in our community. As a young woman in the Labor Party and from the left of the Labor Party, I always knew that Anne had my back. On my first day here, a bottle of champagne arrived with 2 very posh glasses from Anne. This was followed by many visits and calls from Anne, where I was cajoled, dragooned, convinced to do many things for Anne, including joining the Parliamentary Friends of Drug Reform, going to visit Guthrie House, which is the accommodation service for women leaving prison. She introduced me to the Scarlet Alliance and Family Drug Support. She brought in the people from Shine for Kids and too many other organisations and individuals to name here. Just last week, I was the parliamentary host for a new organisation that Anne had helped found, the Penthos Foundation, a group working to support the mental health of people with profound grief, usually as the result of the loss of a child. Anne taught me that all relationships are valuable, that finding common ground is essential to moving an issue forward. More important, the idea is just simply winning. She also taught me that preparation, persistence and tenacity are required to make real and lasting change. We may not win the first time we try to change something, but know that when the window of opportunity again opens, you have to be ready to step through it. It is 20 years since Anne Symonds retired from this place. She had struggled with ill health that entire time. But she never stopped pursuing the issues she cared about. I thank her for her support, advice and the sneaky glasses of champagne. I send condolences to Rachel, David, Kathy, Michael and Meredith on behalf of the members of this place, as well as the staff of the Parliament. We thank you for sharing Anne with us. Valet Anne Symonds.
Mr Deputy President, I'd like to say at the outset how happy I am that the last matter of substantive business, despite of course the sadness of its cause, is to be discussing the passing and, more importantly, the contribution of an honourable member, a former honourable member, who embraced and embodied so many of the good qualities of our House, which time hasn't, I don't think, diminished, nevertheless. Even though there have been some changes, some, of course, would regret the fact that after Lee Rhiannon crashed John Tingle's martini party, they had to die. I know that Anne Symonds was someone who, with John Tingle, understood that after the House was concluded, there wasn't anything wrong with getting together and sharing some conviviality in terms of the collegiality of this House, but unfortunately that was not how Lee Rhiannon saw it. But I won't take that any further, because today is all about discussing and noting with sadness the death of Elizabeth Ann Symonds. Anne was a dedicated member of the Legislative Council for 16 years and dedicated her time in this place to a range of social issues that were dear to her. These issues ranged from drug law reform and women's rights through to youth services and equity for Aboriginal people. She came to this place, as she said in her inaugural speech, not out of a desire to enter Parliament, but because, quote, the top people said, "Anne, you've got to put yourself forward." End of quote. And while she was not successful at the 1981 election, a casual vacancy later arose, and the rest is, of course, history. Like it would seem so many former members of this House, including 3 presidents, Anne Symonds grew up in Murwillumbah, having been born there in 1939. She completed her teacher education in Armidale and moved to Sydney in 1960. It was after settling in the eastern suburbs that she joined the Labor Party, and as we've heard, she served as an alderman on Waverley Municipal Council from 1974 to 1977, and as Deputy Mayor in 1977, in fact the first female Deputy Mayor of Waverley before she entered the New South Wales Parliament. During her time in this place, Anne did not serve as part of the executive government. However, she made a particularly fine contribution as Deputy Chair and later Chair of the Social Issues Committee from 1988 to 1998. As a result, she was able to champion issues that were close to her heart. She joined this place in a slightly different era, not long, well, in fact, a very different era, not long after members were directly elected. Anne recounted in her contribution to the Legislative Council Oral History Project in 2016 that the time she was a member of this place was one in which there was a greater contrast between the function of the Houses and between the Legislative Council and the Executive Government, with only one minister in this place. Indeed, she recounted that when she was first elected, Labor members of this House were not admitted to caucus, a position she supported until they were popularly elected and full-time. However, whilst practices might have changed, what has stood the test of time is the ability for members to work across the aisle and across parties to achieve positive policy outcomes. Anne recounted fondly her work with other female members, most notably Virginia Chadwick and Meredith Bergman, on policy issues of mutual interest, particularly advancing women's rights in relation to homelessness, housing and women in prison at a time when there were fewer women in the Parliament. This advocacy across the aisle, in many respects, is not dissimilar to the collaboration that we've seen in recent terms, Mr Deputy President, on issues such as LGBTI reform. After leaving Parliament in 1998, her advocacy continued as part of the drug summit called by the Carr government after the 1999 election, which is the time, I think, at which I probably first met her. Although it may have been earlier while I was a staffer, I'm not sure. After leaving Parliament in 1998, her advocacy continued as part of the... sorry, I've made that point. I'll withdraw that. I would now, as I often do on these motions, like to pass on some of the observations that former Liberal members have in their memory of Anne. The first one, even though she hasn't been able to directly pass it on, was something the Honourable Virginia Chadwick said in commenting on in response to Anne's valedictory speech on the 29th of April 1998. Virginia said this: "One of the great things about being a Member of Parliament, as Anne alluded to, is that many of us come to this place with preconceived ideas about people who belong to other political parties. One of the great joys is being able to find out that the world is not black and white, but is fairly woolly and grey. People like Anne make sure we remember that we're individuals first and foremost. They actually make it a pleasure for us to get to know others who have views that we assumed would be diametrically opposed to ours. More often than not, it turns out that there is more common ground than different ground." End quote. On behalf of the I would also like to mention comments from the Honourable John Jobling. She said, "Even though Anne was strongly pro-Labor in her views, she had a wicked sense of humour and was very easy to get along with, all the while trying to subtly change your views on issues." And then he made the observation, I don't know whether it's true or not, I think she was liked by more people outside Labor than within it. But anyway, I'll have to leave that probably for members of the opposition to judge. I'm in no position to do that. Certainly that couldn't be said of the Honourable Penny Sharp's very emotional and sincere comments earlier. The Honourable Dr Brian Prezzuti said, "I'm very sad she's gone. She was a beautiful person who I had lots of contact with in my time as a member of the Upper House. She made a huge contribution, particularly to the Social Issues Committee, especially working on adoption law reform." And finally, from my good friend, the Honourable John Ryan, he had quite a bit to say, and I'll quote him. "Anne was a wonderful combination of the intensely serious and beguilingly cheeky. She was the lover of many unlovely causes, where she was often ridiculed initially, only to be proven right in the long term. She was a passionate advocate for harm minimisation approaches to countering alcohol and drug abuse, HIV and AIDS, and alternative approaches in corrections. She provocatively and proudly called herself a socialist, and yet she won enormous respect from coalition members, even those who strongly disagreed with her, because they admired her courage, conviction, and enjoyed her disarming sense of humour. It didn't hurt that her wit was aimed just as frequently at the members who sat behind her as much as those on our side. Anne was so much more than a Member of Parliament. She tirelessly networked and coordinated numerous social justice groups. At her invitation, I joined one of the groups she had established called Guthrie House, which was an NGO that operated a house providing accommodation support for women at the verge of or entering or just leaving corrections. She will be long remembered for her work championing the cause of mothers and babies in prisons, and who knows how many lives she touched and changed." So, with those few observations of my own, and on behalf of those four very fine former members of this House, I would like to say on behalf of the government, we thank Elizabeth Ann Symonds AM for her service to this Parliament and the people of New South Wales. We express our deepest sympathy to her family, friends and loved ones at no doubt what is a very difficult time.
I've already indicated that I was going to give the call to the Leader of the Opposition. I think that's appropriate.
Thank you, Mr Deputy President. I rise as Leader of the Opposition and as Leader of the Labor Party in this place to associate myself and our party as a whole with the motion proposed by the Honourable Penny Sharp, and associate ourselves with the words that she has given this chamber and the sentiments expressed also by the Leader of the Government in this place. Anne was a warm and loving person with extravagant passions about people, politics and causes. She was great fun to be with and to be around, and was inspirational for those of us interested and serious about political life. As a person who came to political awareness and activism in the 60s and 70s, she always retained the sense of optimism about what could be achieved through parliamentary politics that is often associated with that time period and many of the issues that came to the fore at that time in our society. She was a passionate advocate for social change in so many ways, and I won't recount them all, but particularly drug law reform, the rights of children of prisoners and equal rights for LGBTI people were just some of the causes that she wore out the carpet in the corridors, knocking on ministers' doors. I came to know her well when I worked for the Honourable Jeff Shaw, who was a minister and a member of this chamber, and she was indefatigable, not to say exhausting, knocking on his door, knocking on the door of Bob Debus, then the Corrections Minister, always advocating to push the envelope, to make the changes, to create a fairer, safer, more humane society for us all. And as Anne used to impress on people, including me as a younger political activist, the way we and society treat the most vulnerable in our communities, the people who need the help the most, often unlovely people and associated and very difficult people. I wasn't looking at you, Mr. Shoebridge. It's about how we deal with those issues that is the measure of how good society is. And that is a lesson that Anne liked to impress on people who wanted themselves to enter into politics. She saw herself, I believe, first and foremost as an activist for social change, definitely not as a career politician. Her pursuit of issues that she cared about and believed passionately needed to be addressed came first, not her own personal advancement. And the Honourable Penny Sharp has made the point that her adherence to these causes, her principled and unrelenting pursuit of change in these areas are probably what cost her a ministerial career, which is not, which of course cost the state having a very good person who would have made a fine contribution to executive government. Anne was an unashamed radical on the left of Labor politics. She was an inspiration, as I've indicated, to many younger activists who have followed her into politics and even into this place. And as I said, she never took a backward step. She always said what she thought needed to be said to whomever she thought it needed to be said, irrespective of their rank or any of those sorts of considerations. Anne continued to pursue the issues close to her heart even after she departed elected office, and she particularly continued to remain in contact with me around issues associated with drug law reform, about which she felt very, very passionately. I think if you had to sum up one word to describe Anne, it would be passionate. She made a huge impression on a whole generation of activists in the Labor Party, not only on the left. I was extremely fond of her, and I believe she, perhaps not directly, but she has had a profound impact on our side of politics. And our condolences go to her family at this time. Thank you, Mr. Deputy President.
Mr. Deputy President.
Mr. Justice, can I just indicate that I will, in a few minutes, have to interrupt for a procedural issue.
I understand.
Please don't take it as being rude.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy President. I rise on behalf of the Greens, but on my colleague in particular, Jan Barham, who asked if I could put some words on the record in support of this condolence motion on the passing of Anne Symonds. And I apologise to the House for reading this on my phone, but this comes directly from Jan. I first met Anne when I came to work with Ian Cohen in the New South Wales Legislative Council in 1995. I knew of Anne from the amazing body of work she had done previously as a social justice campaigner. She had been on the Social Justice Committee, and I was inspired by her passion and commitment to seeking reform for the disadvantaged and vulnerable. I had the pleasure and privilege of working closely with Anne during the Safe Injecting Rooms inquiry and with the Parliamentary Friends for Drug Law Reform Group. After Anne's retirement, I maintained a friendship with her. We would meet for coffee and a chat, and she provided inspiration in terms of my priorities for public life. When she visited her birthplace on the North Coast, we would meet up and she would tell me great stories about the past, who had her back and who caused her grief. I realised these stories, in these stories there was wisdom and guidance and Anne's willingness to mentor women, and thankfully me, in the rough and tumble of politics, was part of her generous spirit. She had been through a lot but always stood her ground and knew what was right. Anne was also fabulous at searching out allies for the causes and was respectful of others, and that meant she could gain support for important outcomes. When I returned to Parliament in 2011, I reconnected with Anne and had the privilege of sitting on the Drug Law Reform Group Committee with her. I would meet up with her at the fabulous apartment, and we again would share stories about what was happening behind the scenes and art and theatre, and we would laugh a lot. Anne Symonds was one of the most inspirational people I've ever met, and I am honoured to have had her friendship. She will be sorely missed, but New South Wales is a better place for her activism and passion. Mr Deputy President, I'm glad to have been able to read those words from my colleague, Ms Jan Barham, onto the record in support of this motion. On behalf of Jan and the Greens, we send our condolences to Anne's family and friends. Thank you.
Thank you. Just before I give anyone else the call, according to sessional order, proceedings are interrupted half an hour after the conclusion of question time to permit the minister to move the adjournment motion if desired.
No.
Yeah, I didn't anticipate that the answer would be any different to that. Look, I think I'll do Mr John Graham, because he's been here, and it also keeps a balance, even if it's only on the left.
Thank you, Mr Deputy President. I want to add my thoughts to this resolution. I thank the Honourable Penny Sharp for moving it today. Anne Symonds has been described by others in these words: kind, funny and big-hearted. I agree with all of those. For me, though, one of the things about Anne was she was always in company. I don't ever think of Anne as by herself. It was always Anne and Bruce and Jeanette, Bruce Childs and Jeanette McHugh, or Anne and Meredith Bergman, or Anne and Sue, or Anne and Sue and Paul Tracy. That's a personal observation about Anne, but it was also key to her politics. It was key to how she worked. She was a part of a bigger Labor movement. She was one of those people who, in the Labor movement, brought the social movements of the 60s and 70s into the Labor Party. So it was both how I think of her, how she operated, but part of a broader political development around that time. She was also, though, someone who was a traditional Labor person, and she said this as she left this place in 1998: "I've enjoyed being a representative of the Australian Labor Party. I look forward to its return to its traditional values." That was her view. She saw herself as a traditional Labor person. What were those traditional values? Well, she highlighted this in particular: "We're facing a terrible new tyranny of ideas. People in the Enlightenment fought against the tyranny of the divine right of despots. Our tyranny is about market values dominating society. If we don't return to human values, we'll be in big trouble." So those were the values which, at the end of her significant career, she saw as most significant. She was a powerful example. I think the word inspiration is a good one. She certainly was that to me, and she, with others, really defined at the time the tradition which certainly I will work, I view myself as working on in this House. On those issues, her commitment to drug law reform has already been highlighted. I won't add to that other than to say this: Labor, after the election, is committed to another drug summit following on from that first very successful one. Well, when that occurs, we'll certainly think of Anne when people gather for that drug summit. I do want to recognise her work in prisons. As the son of a probation and parole officer, I'm in awe of the work she did for prisoners. But
for me, the one issue I did want to highlight was her work on guns, because she was very powerful on this issue in particular. She was a tireless advocate, and she argued this: communities are largely protected by justice and tolerance. That was the view, that was the perspective she brought to that debate. Her relationship with John Tingle's already been highlighted. So, you know, a passionate advocate against guns, but this relationship, and I do want to put on the record John Tingle's recollection of that relationship, because I do think it says a lot. He said this: "It was inevitable that we should become friends. When I came into this place, she was a much-loved friend of my late mother. Our friendship was inevitable because I discovered we shared a mutual passion for firearms, albeit from opposite ends of the barrel." But I think that says it all, that, you know, a passionate advocate, but still with the respect of someone arguing the other side of the case. I'll finish on this point, Mr Deputy President. And that's to leave the last word to Jono Johnson, a son of Murwillumbah, the place where Anne was born, as has already been observed. Jono said this: "We loved you while you were here, and we'll love you when you're gone." She's gone from this place. She's now gone from this world. She's much loved. We offer our condolences today.
Deputy President.